Today's forum is the second of a five-part series on innovation and entrepreneurship presented with support from J.P. Morgan Chase, represented today by Todd Elliott and Courtney Hodap. Today's forum is also sponsored by Regionomics and Kaufman Media. Please join me in thanking those sponsors again and welcome Mr. Bill Lafayette, founder and owner of Regionomics, to the stage to introduce our speaker. Bill?
Thank you, Mo. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Lafayette. I'm founder and owner of Regionomics, which is an economic workforce strategy firm focusing on regional, local, and neighborhood economies and on regional workforce planning. I'm also a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. Regionomics is proud to sponsor today's forum, not only because today's speaker is a friend of mine and a stalwart supporter of CMC, but because his message is a vital one that we all need to hear. As I hope you know, we have an entrepreneurship problem in Central Ohio. Our rate of small business births has fallen by more than 40% in the last 35 years. It is consistently below the national average and has in recent years actually dropped below the small business death rate. This is a serious problem that should worry all of us. To address it, we need to pay close attention to the stories and ideas that we're going to hear today. Our speaker today is known to many of you as former students, business associates, confidants, and friends. Roger Blackwell holds a PhD, is the author of more than 49 books, his latest we will hear about today. He's an American marketing expert, well recognized in his field, and an internationally known public speaker. He's lectured to executive groups on 6 continents and was described in the New York Times as one of America's top speakers on business and marketing. Please welcome to the stage our friend, Dr. Roger Blackwell. Roger, have at it.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that very much. I noticed that they are taping this. I always get very aware when people are recording things. I remember one time when I spoke at a Chamber of Commerce meeting in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and the reporter came up afterwards and said, I taped your entire speech, and he said, I think it would be interesting to our readers of the newspaper. Would you mind if I just printed it verbatim in the newspaper? And I said, no, that's fine with me. I said, the only problem is, I said, when you actually print something, it comes off a little different. Like jokes usually don't go from an oral presentation to printed. So if you'll just delete the jokes, then you can print the rest of it. I said, send me a copy of the newspaper when you get it. And he did. A few days later, I got the newspaper. He printed the entire speech verbatim. And at the end, he said, in addition to the above comments, Dr. Blackwell told a few jokes that can't be printed. So don't worry, I'm not going to tell any jokes that can't be printed. Before I talk, I really would like to say thank you for being here to each one of you. I appreciate that. I look around and I see so many good friends. I see so many former students, business associates, and most of all, I see my lovely wife, who we're going to be celebrating our first anniversary very quickly. Linda's my biggest supporter. There's no question about that. This book is for 3 types of readers. I have to be careful when I say that because at the book launch not too long ago, I said it's for 3 readers. I hope that's not true. I hope it's for 3 types of readers. And the first type is people who have the vision, maybe a dream of starting their own business. How do you do that? Successfully, because it's not that hard to start a business. A successful one is different. 80% of all new businesses fail within the first 4 years, and actually most of them fail within the first 1 or 2 years. And so what we want to do is to make sure if you have that dream of a business, you're one of the 20% who succeed, not one of the 80% who don't. And this is principles of how to do that. The second type of reader it's for is people who own a business now and want to grow it. Now, a lot of people start a business, and it's fairly successful. It's a little bit like building an experimental plane. You might say, well, you don't need any theory. You just build a plane and see if it flies. There's an organization over in Dayton called Aileron, which helps entrepreneurs. And you might say, well, why would they call it aileron? Because that's the part of the plane that gives lift. And basically, it is as dangerous to build a new business and expect it to fly very high without knowing the theory or theories of why some firms grow and others don't, as it is to build an experimental airplane and then hope it'll fly. There are people who've built a business and they don't know any theory. In fact, one of my favorite examples is Bridget Murphy in here. Does anybody know the story of Bridget Murphy? She started one of the most successful businesses in America, a dynasty that became a political dynasty in the 1850s when her husband died and left her with little small children, and she had to figure out what to do. She was an immigrant. There were no relatives to help. Neighbors watched the children so that she could take a job as a servant girl in a grocery store. And she worked there for a number of years, eventually bought that grocery store when the couple who owned it retired, and brought her own children into the business. And this is the way entrepreneurship works. Brought it into the children of the business and helped her oldest son start a tavern a block away because they sold liquor in the grocery store. And he grew that business, went ahead. This was in Boston. He actually graduated, paid his own way through Harvard. And her grandchildren and great-grandchildren turned out pretty well. I told her your name. I told you her name was Bridget Murphy. Has anybody guessed what her husband's name was? Bridget Murphy Kennedy. The Kennedy dynasty was started because of a single mother entrepreneur. And we tell the story in here. I got it from a book called Unexceptional Women. A lot of times we think, oh, women are becoming entrepreneurs today. No, this whole book is about women entrepreneurs in the 1800s. How many know all these? John Jacob Astor, who was the brains behind that organization? His wife, who not only ran the business, but had 8 children in the place they lived over the fur business. And these are some of the stories we talk about is why did he become, at one point, the richest person in America? And he was smart enough to pay his wife a whole lot for consulting services. And, of course, they started the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And many people believe it was the key, the real estate business came from her. So the second type of people is those who want to grow their businesses. And you can do it like Bridget Murphy, who there weren't any marketing textbooks back then. She just did it and experimented, but it's a whole lot safer to know why some work better than others and how to grow them beyond just a single smaller business. The third type of person that I wrote this book for is those who want to grow their investment portfolio. You do not have to be an entrepreneur to make a lot of money from entrepreneurship. In fact, there's a man in Omaha, Nebraska, who's done rather well just investing in other entrepreneurs. I don't know. He doesn't even make enough to live in a very big house. Warren, I think, is his first name. But I just read this a couple of days ago. If you invested $30,000 in Berkshire Hathaway when he first started, today that would be worth $30 million. Okay? And that's the way it works. If you know which entrepreneurs are going to be successful. And how do you do that? Well, that's why we wrote this book, is to know that. And you don't have to go far. You don't have to go to Omaha to find good examples. Does anybody in this room ever own stock in the Limited or L Brands now? Anybody here? Some of the wealthier people in Columbus did. If you bought $1,000 worth of stock in the Limited, when it went public with 9 stores, you see, that's the way it works. You take a little, and you figure out which ones are going to ramp up. 9, he ramped it up and went public. That $1,000 worth of Limited stock would be worth today how much? It's been in the newspaper. I read it in Business First, so I'm sure it's true. You back there, Don? And how much would that be worth today? Guesses? $1,000 in 1969? $2.5 million? Well, Leslie Wexner at the shareholders meeting last year, off the cuff, somebody asked him, and he said, I think we've helped shareholders quite well. If you'd have bought $1,000, it would be worth $40 million today. And immediately afterwards, the PR people from L Brands got the press together and said, he was talking off the cuff. That's not true. It was actually $50 million. Who will be the next big winners locally? I see Chris Duty back there at Piata. How many stores do you have, Chris? 20. So you're twice as far along as Leslie was when he went public. And Chris had good instruction. There's a person who knows a little bit about the restaurant business sitting next to him there, Sue Duty. Will it be City Barbecue? Actually started in a garage, and we use the term garage entrepreneurs because the most successful firms often start in the garage or the basement or the kitchen. And that term means it doesn't take a lot of capital. In fact, it's more likely to be successful if it doesn't have a lot of capital. I'll explain. Or could it be Jenny's? I don't think Jenny is here today, but that's another. We have a lot of examples. And Columbus is the maternity ward of restaurants. Okay? Max and Irma's that's the reason we have the Blackwell Inn today, is because of Max and Irma's doing fairly well over the years. Restaurants and retailers, Columbus is the mecca for retailing and retailers. But it's also, Columbus, I believe, is the Silicon Valley of the Midwest. I had a conference call with a firm that wants me to go on their board in the Silicon Valley. And one of the things, they were saying, what could you bring to this board and so forth? And I said, well, I can bring reality because I'm from the Midwest. And they recognized it. The owner and founder of the company is one of my former students, and he said, that's what we want. And when I go to Silicon Valley, they know I'm from the Midwest because I actually wear a tie sometimes. But CompuServe was the birthplace of so many technologies here in Columbus. Bank One with the first ATM, the first drive-in window, the first Visa and MasterCard. All that started in Columbus. And what was the first online newspaper in the United States? Anybody know? Probably the New York Times or Washington Post or Wall Street Journal. No, it was the Dispatch. First online newspaper. First online banking was through something called Cube. Anybody old enough to remember Cube? Well, and you look at Battelle and OCLC and so forth, who will be the future stars in technology? We have Kaufman Media back here in digital signage. I hope it's one of those. And we have Click-to-My, several. How many are clients of Click-to-My's here? Some of you? Several of you? Help them help you do well, and maybe you'll be the next CompuServe or others. HealthSpot. Healthcare Data Works, which is an interesting technology firm because it takes things that were invented at Ohio State and commercializes them, which is an area that Ohio State has been trying to do with mixed success, but I think they're getting better at it. Anyway, that's what this book is about. Which ones will win for your portfolio so that you know, do I invest in the next Limited or the Berkshire Hathaway? And for mature readers, I like the word mature readers better than other terms, okay? It's the key to having your retirement income not expire before you do. Because you have to have, well, in this I talk about the S-curve of entrepreneurship. Firms hit an inflection point and take off. And the way you make the really big returns is to invest after they've been successful and hit that inflection point and start to grow. And then either they better have dividends or something when they get to mature, or don't expect them to grow much. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a technology like algae, which Ross Young, I see back there, his firm's growing as fast as algae do, and that's pretty fast. Now, there are three major problems we could talk about in the economy. See, I started out, the original title was called Garage Entrepreneurs. I changed it to Saving America because after working on this for 2 years, really, I realized that there's something bigger than just helping people take small firms into large fortunes, which is what I've been involved with over the years quite a bit. And in the process of writing it, there are three major reasons, economic problems in this country. There are more, of course. One is jobs. Where are the jobs going to come from in the future? And the answer is the jobs will be created by whoever's the president of the United States. Not. The jobs will be created by Congress. Not by the governor. Not by the Federal Reserve. No, the Federal Reserve's policies right now are creating less jobs every year because low interest rates stimulate capital expansion by big firms. 40,000 biggest firms in the U.S. employ 47%. And those firms with low interest rates get capital for what purpose? To add more people to their firms? No, to add technology and automation and robots to lay off people. Because if you're driven by earnings per share, EPS, that's the way it works. Don't look to large firms to create, and don't look to the Fed to create more jobs. In fact, the third thing I was going to talk about is inequality. Are we getting more, are the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer? You hear that. Well, it's only half true, actually. But the rich are getting a higher proportion of everything, and the Fed's policies currently encourage that. Maybe you saw the article in this morning's Wall Street Journal. What the Fed is doing now, by keeping interest rates low and easy money, is encouraging more return to the people who already have wealth, and less to the people who don't have jobs. Now, you don't have to say, Blackwell said that. You can quote the Wall Street Journal from this morning on that one. So income inequality and poverty is another issue, one that I've been very concerned about. But if you don't know the cause of inequality and poverty, you won't know the cure. And I'm convinced we're listening to a lot of politicians who don't know the cause of jobs. Don't expect anybody asking for your vote to know how to cure the unemployment problem if they don't know what causes jobs. Third economic problem is slow GDP growth. I am not going to focus on that one today because I don't have time, but the rapid growth of the past is over. We might have had 4% this last quarter. We had 2.9 down the previous quarter. But anybody who expects us to be 4 or 5% a year has been visiting Colorado too often. If I have time, I'll explain why you shouldn't expect rapid growth in GDP. It's basic demographics. Now, what's the answer to all these problems? Entrepreneurs know the answer. In fact, they are the answer. Let's look at jobs. What's the current unemployment rate in the United States? Bill, what's the best rate? 6.1, is that the most recent month? 6.1, it's rounded off to 6%. So that means if it's 6% unemployed, 94% of all adults are working. Not. What percentage actually are working? And the answer, the last month that I have data for, is 63%. 63% of all the adults in America are all that have jobs. The others don't. Now, there's good reasons for some of them. You get more people over 65, 75. Some of them don't want jobs anymore. Sometimes they say, oh, you mean they've retired? No, the new word is they've been reassigned, not retired. But what's happening in almost every industry is what's happening in agriculture and manufacturing. We can turn out more output with less people. Okay? Let's take ag. Ag's not important to Ohio, right? It's our biggest single economic sector. And how's it doing? Oh, it's doing well. Have you noticed the price of land and stocks and John Deere and people like that? The interesting thing is that 100 years ago, 70% of all the people who worked in this country worked on the farm. You know what the percentage is today? Less than 2, about 1.8%. So that means we're not making any crops on the farm today. No, output has been so efficient, so productive, that the amount of money we spend on consumers for food has gone from 20% to 10% of our budgets. See, consumers win, but only 2% or less of the jobs are there. And the economy is fine. I like to make startling comments sometimes. The better the economy, the less the jobs. That startle you? Well, look at agriculture. Now, the same thing's happening in manufacturing. Are we making anything in factories in the U.S. today? Yeah, manufacturing output has almost doubled since 1990. Factories are rolling out so fast in this country, we're making so much in this country that we can't get rail cars. And you can't hire over-the-road truck drivers. Why? Because they're only making $70,000 or $80,000 a year. Where are you going to get any unemployed person to take a job like over-the-road truck driver for 70 or 80 or over 100,000? I have a list of jobs that pay over 100,000 a year without having even a high school degree. Usually they do have a high school GED. Maybe you read this in the journal. What's this guy make? He's a welder. He didn't graduate from a distinguished university like the Ohio State University. Business Week had an article. How much does he make? $300,000. I know PhDs that don't make $300,000. In fact, there's only 8 of them at Ohio State now that make $1 million a year of professors. All the rest of them make usually less than $300,000. Now, see, this is what's really happening. In manufacturing, you made good money. A lot of people say, what's happening to the middle class? How you can middle the class? Well, all you have to do is get manufacturing to come back, they say. Manufacturing's already come back. It just doesn't need people. We've gone from 30% of the people working in factories in 1950. Today, it's about 8 or 9%. And it will go the same way as agriculture. We don't need any more human beings in factories than we do on the farm. And you know what? It's going to happen in banking. I just saw a study that showed over the next 5 years, banks will be able to reduce the number of employees by 25%. I was in a firm, and their accounting office had a bunch of empty desks in it. I said, the firm's growing. It does really well. I said, what's happened? They said, oh, well, we've gone from 45 accountants to 17. You know, even a CPA is no guarantee, and that was always a guarantee. Why? What we're getting is more productivity. A lot of people say, oh, our jobs have gone to China or Mexico or someplace. Those people have spent too much time in Colorado also. The jobs have gone to productivity. And you know what? It has to be that way. A lot of people say, why don't we pass a law to say you can't lay off any people, you got to continue to pay them whether you need them or not. The answer is then we wouldn't be able to compete with countries that have low labor rates. You don't send factories to other countries to compete with them. You take the labor out in this country. That's exactly what's happened. And you know what? Those jobs are over in terms of large numbers of growth. Now, if you know how to do something like weld or plumb or carpenter or so forth like that, yeah, you can make $100,000. Air traffic controllers make $100,000 a year. Good over-the-road truck drivers make over $100,000 or more. But you got to know something to do it. And that's what our suburban schools are really good at, is teaching people how to have jobs like that. No, our suburban and urban schools are good at preparing people for college, not for jobs. Until we correct that, we should expect unemployment more and more and more. And some of you might be on school boards or something. When's the last time you said, we're going to put a new curriculum in and teach people how to be welders and plumbers? You'll get thrown off the school board. You got to teach kids to get into Harvard or the Ohio State Honors Program or wherever. And that's the fundamental issue. Well, what's the answer? And the answer is Small Business Administration indicates that of all net new jobs in the last 3 decades, their number is 67% came from firms with under 50 employees. The Kauffman Foundation and some others put it at even higher numbers. There is no future for American employment, let alone GDP growth, stuff like that, unless You are good at doing and investing in firms that can start with 2 or 3 employees and grow to 5 and go to 50. Yeah, Les Wexner is a fairly wealthy person, but he also created, I've forgotten what it's 80,000 or 90,000 associates working there, and a few other law firms benefiting from that growth also. And some of them even have veterinarians working on their dogs and cats and stuff, I've heard. So, politicians don't create jobs. Who does? Consumers. You do not understand the cause of jobs if you don't understand consumer behavior. Now, I was very fortunate with Dave Collett and Jim Engel to write the first textbook in consumer behavior. Now it's called behavioral economics, but it's the basic same thing. The people who create the jobs, 71% of all jobs are created by consumers and the firms who know what consumers want to buy. And that's what this book is all about. Now you hear that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Only half true. The people at the top are getting a higher percentage, whether it's the top 20% or the top 10%, higher every year, or top 1%. The most best-selling book in the country today, the world today, is Thomas Piketty, Capital in 21st century. And the interesting thing about it is, he says the reason the wealthy are getting wealthier is because the return on capital, R, is greater than GDP growth, delta GDP. What he doesn't recognize is that it's not the same people. Yeah, the top 20% are getting more, but those are fundamentally different people than 20 years ago. 70% of all the billionaires started out like Leslie Wexner and Dave Thomas, with nothing. If you came to me and said, I want to be a billionaire, what's the best chance? Start with nothing. And he also doesn't, when he looks at these, Piketty doesn't recognize that transfer payments are very important. In other words, I don't know, is Medicare, or Medicaid and Social Security and 8A rent contracts and these things important? WIC programs, food stamps? He says, no, they're not part of income. And who gets those? The top 20% or the bottom 20%? And he also forgets to include the underground economy, which University of Wisconsin studies estimates it's $2 trillion in this country. $2 trillion. What's the single biggest source of those dollars that are not measured in the economy? What's the biggest single product that's sold in the unmeasured economy? Drugs, okay? What's the second biggest? Garage sales. Not actually, but unmeasured stuff. Well, who gets most of the underground economy? The top 20% of the population or the bottom 20%? The bottom 20%, and they spread it around to the rest of the poor people. And Piketty doesn't even, he forgot about that. The most important thing he forgot about is the Turner thesis. Frederick Jackson Turner, maybe the greatest historian we've had in this country, taught at Harvard. Talked about the frontier shaped American capitalism. You see, in France, where Piketty is from, and Europe generally, it was the aristocracy who controlled land. And what you had in life was what you inherited. In the U.S., how much land did people inherit? None. They took it from the Native Americans, actually. Remember Bonanza? Anybody remember that program? Ponderosa. Did the Cartwright family inherit that? No. The people who prospered in this country on the frontier, and that's the whole Turner thesis, were people who could plow deep, shoot straight, and work from dawn to dusk. And that influenced American capitalism fundamentally different. In the U.S., we are a meritocracy, not an inheritocracy. It's a market measured. If you look at who gets the money today, it's the Leslie Wexners who grew up in that big mansion in Bexley. No, not at all. Or how many know the name of Andre Romel Young? He just sold his company for $3 billion and kept several of his other companies. He was raised, an African American who was raised on the south side of Los Angeles, bounced around, dysfunctional family, various schools, and he has several other firms, but he sold one for $3 billion. You might know, who knows Andre Romel Young? Dr. Dre, yes. Okay. My daughter's an actress. Actresses don't make much money. Well, I told her, Madonna made $125 million. And I'm a writer. I can tell you, writers don't make much money. Except this lady wrote a great literary novel last year called 50 Shades of Green, was it? I should have called this 50 Shades of Green. I would have sold more books, probably. Well, those are the economic problems, and how do you solve them is what this book is about. Why people buy from your firm, and how to get them to return to buy more. The best sources of capital for starting a firm. And what's the absolute best capital? Best place to get your capital? Your own savings, or savings of the family. Don't go to venture capitalists and get money until after you've started to grow. Okay, in fact, the single biggest reason firms don't win as entrepreneurs is TMC, too much capital, because they focus on the investors instead of focusing on customers. I'm not saying capital is inherently wrong, it just keeps them from learning what's inherently right. And when they learn what's inherently right, and people say, oh, wow, you got a winner there, the venture capitalists will come calling on you. It's not capital, it's ability. The riches are in the niches. Now, I taught that there were 3 major theories of marketing or concepts that are the most important. How many former students do I have here? Okay, you can ask any of them and they'll tell you what they are. Market segmentation, functional shiftability. Why is Les Wexner as wealthy as he is? Why is Jeff Bezos dominate? Why did Sam Walton start with one little store when he was 45 years old and create the world's richest family? Functional shiftability. And if you don't know what that means, don't expect your firm to grow from small to large, to transform a whole industry. And of course, global thinking. You cannot just think domestically today. And basically, these are the topics of the book. And cash management. When's the best time to borrow cash? When you don't need it, okay? That's what Ford Motor did. Before the recession, they mortgaged everything and got a credit line, and GM and Chrysler, both the shareholders, lost every bit of their equity. How much did Ford survive the recession? Yes, you see. And we have a whole chapter on cash management. And there's a chapter on how to win with people. It's called Win with People. I thought that was a creative title. Well, these are the theories that are all about it. And in the last chapter, we talk about how to apply this to your own investment portfolio, including predicting which firms and products will grow in the future. As I wind this up, and you can be getting some questions if you want me, I'll be glad to try to answer questions on any of these. But there are industries right here in Columbus that are just either in or getting close to that takeoff point, the point of inflection. CNG, okay, one of the stocks that I bought since I got back was Worthington Industries. Not to be confused with Worthington Foods. Worthington Industries. What do? Well, they make canisters or cylinders for CNG. Make sense? Compressed natural gas. We're opening another CNG plant right here in Columbus in August sometime, I've forgotten when. Drones. Do you think drones are going to grow much in the future? Oh, yeah. It's going to be the hottest. 3D printing. How many here have a 3D printer in your firm? I teach several. I teach all over the country, more and more. I ask that question in almost everywhere. Now I'm finding firms using 3D printers, and it's growing rapidly. It's a stock that I bought. Why? Because I tried to pick the dominant one in that industry. It's a growth industry. That's how you get your portfolio to grow. I just learned, and of course, algae with Ross Young is the type of thing that's growing rapidly for pharmaceuticals and so forth. I just learned of the newest industry in Ohio. It's an agriculture industry. I heard the story on NPR and did some investigation on it. Insect farms. Insects, you see, a typical cow requires 8 pounds of feed to produce a single pound of beef. Insects, on the other hand, require only 2 pounds of feed to produce 1 pound of meat, making them 4 times as efficient, because bugs get their heat from the environment instead of having to create it like mammals do. There's more nutrients in insects than beef, 1/3 the calories, diet food right there. And insects take 1 gallon of water to raise a pound of protein instead of 400 to 1,000 or more for beef. So I don't know, Chris, are edible bugs going to be on the menu someday? The fact is, I've eaten them because I taught in Africa for several months, over 30 years, and you eat insects. What do they taste like? Well, peanuts. And they're salted and the various sorts of mealies and all these sorts of things. And I don't know. I'm not sure that's at the point of inflection yet. But these are the kinds of things that you look at when you look at how to grow a firm in the future. And that's what this book is all about. We could take any one of those and talk for an hour or two, but I won't. Thank you very much. Is there a question? Phil?
Yes, Roger. 2 questions. We know that during uncertain times, you weed out the weak players and the strong ones widen the gap. What have you learned that entrepreneurs do to make them strong? And did you find that spirituality was a factor in taking a garage business and making it successful?
Very good questions. Yes. How many of you here think we're going to have a recession in the future? Everybody put their hand up, okay? In fact, there's a whole book that talks about the first economic forecasted a recession. You know what that book is? Who was the first economic forecaster?
Bible.
Book of Genesis, okay? Joseph, Pharaoh said, lean cows and fat cows and all this sort of thing, and he said, yeah, we're going to have a recession. And, but before that, we're going to have boom times. Now, before Keynes ever wrote a page, what Joseph said was, what you should do during good times is increase taxes. And they taxed grain back then. Take the grain in. Don't give any subsidies from the government. And then when you get into a recession, what you do is you decrease taxes, you start taking away the grain, and you give government subsidies to poor people. Keynes said the same thing about several thousand years later. And he's right. And incidentally, the reason that doesn't work in the U.S., we're very, very willing to, politicians are glad to cut taxes and increase government spending during the trough of the recession. It's when we get back in the top, when they should be increasing taxes and cutting government spending, there's the rub. They don't do that. So what an entrepreneur must do, and I spend quite a bit of my time working with people with forecasting cash needs, so forth, they've got to keep the cash reserves so that they don't get caught, because count on the recession. Some people believe we'll have one next year. No one knows that, but don't ever get to the point where a recession is going to put you out of business, because it does. And is that good or bad for the smart entrepreneurs?
Great.
That's great. Recession's wonderful because the smart entrepreneurs get to buy the customers of the bad entrepreneurs. Sometimes they get to buy the businesses for very little cash. And the people, cash is, this chapter is called Cash is King, and how do you manage that? Spirituality, absolutely. I love trees, and last 2 weeks ago, our neighbor had a beautiful, beautiful tree, but the roots were always in the water. And one of those big winds a couple of weeks came through. This is a massive, beautiful tree, several times the height of the ceiling. But it always sat in water. Everything was plentiful. Even during a drought around, there was water. That wind came along and blew the tree over. Roots and all, just sucked them out of there. And I thought, you know, that's what life is. Sometimes when you go through life and everything's good, you're a big tree, things are easy and so forth, when a wind comes along and does something traumatic to you, you get blown out of the water. But if your roots are deep spiritually, and for me, that's understanding the strength that comes from the Creator's resources, as strong as good, solid ground, and so forth. And so, yes, I found that many of the entrepreneurs have a very strong relationship to God, and knowing that is one, it doesn't cause you to be more successful, but it grounds you to be able to accommodate your success without getting blown over by big wins. Bill.
Roger, that was splendid. Bill Lafayette, Regionomics. One of the things that I've been thinking about in stimulating entrepreneurship here in Central Ohio particularly is looking at locally owned, locally serving retail, particularly in lower income neighborhoods that don't have that kind of retail. First of all, do you agree with the premise? Second of all, what would you do to stimulate that?
I would do what the Swedish did. Swedes, the Swedes were once the most socialistic of the European democracies. Their tax rates on corporations is now lower than the US. Well, so is every country. Any major American corporation, if they're logical, are going to move their headquarters someplace else. Don't stay in the US if you're logical about it, okay? Unless people lower the tax rates to be competitive with the rest of the world. Well, the Swedish have done that. But here's the other thing they did, is they put in a course in high school for entrepreneurs, taught entrepreneurship. A study 10 years later found that 1 out of every 5 students who were enrolled in that course actually started a business with an average of 5 employees. See, that's the solution to America's dilemma. And I have known lots of people who came from urban schools, and they often believe they can't be successful as business because nobody's taught them about business, okay? Nice white-bread suburban students may have models in their own family and so forth. Many of them do not. And I think we should be doing something like the Swedes have done. We should be teaching entrepreneurship in schools. There's a few limited experiments in Chicago and a couple of places, and Junior Achievement does some of that. And I'm a great admirer of Junior Achievement, but we don't do much of it. And you know what? We never will. Do you know why? Because the only thing a school should teach is what? What they're going to be graded on in the standard scores. And if they're not graded on it, they're not going to teach it. So we probably have to figure out some other way to accomplish that. But I have found that people just never thought of being a business person themselves. It takes 2 things to be successful: knowledge and diligence. And many people, including myself, can teach the knowledge. And I've done this with young urban males. I've taught this. You know what? You can teach the knowledge. If anybody's got a clue about how to teach the diligence to apply that knowledge, see me afterwards and we'll write the next book together, okay?
Hi, Roger. I'm Ken Thompson. I'm an architect. My wife and I enjoy watching Shark Tank. And she's always saying, couldn't you come up with something we could get on Shark Tank with? So first question, do you watch it? Do you find it annoying or like it? Second question, do you think it does anything to encourage entrepreneurship?
My hero is Mark Cuban, for lots of reasons. Now, the interesting thing is, yes, I think it's a good thing, and it's very instructive, and I happen to think, I don't watch it that often, but when I do, I am very impressed with what Mark Cuban's approach is. We need to teach more about entrepreneurs, and you notice when somebody comes up there, I've got an idea, they say, okay, how many sales did you have? That's the question, and that's the issue. You don't want to get capital. I could give you examples of people. I know somebody locally who's raised a whole lot of capital. It was actually his own money, and started a really good business. He'll go broke because he never learned how to market it. And if you get capital from outside investors, one of 2 things happen. 1, you never learn what causes people to buy the product at a profit. Or 2, if you do, you've given up most of your business to somebody else. That's the genius of some of the people like Jeff Bezos and Leslie Wexner and others, is they kept a high proportion of the stock themselves because they got investors in on their terms. But yeah, love Shark Tank, along with House of Cards and a few others.
Wow.
I would trust business people more than most politicians, frankly. Except Dorothy Teeter and a few people like that.
Thanks once again to our sponsors, Regionomics, Kaufman Media, and JP Morgan Chase, and for our speaker, Mr. Roger Blackwell. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you at the next forum.